I will send everything to you. Okay. So don't worry about the materials. I'm just waiting because I've created the class web page. I uploaded maximum of the all the PowerPoint slides and everything. I'm just waiting for the final roster. Okay, if I upload right now and then if I allow all of you to access those files, and if some of you drop for some reason, and then I have to kind of individually go and take you out. Otherwise, you will keep on getting emails as soon as I upload something, you will get an email. So that's a problem, and nobody wants to a bunch of spam in their email. So that's why I decided to wait till I get the final um, class list. Okay, and your first exam, it's going to be somewhere maybe third week of September or something. We need to take things slowly because what happened in our registration, it was a complete disaster. So as a result, we are taking things slow. I know you guys need to settle in. So once that's settled, then you know what courses you have, and you have access to your PowerPoints, you have access to your textbook. Then comes the question of testing you. So unnecessarily, I will not have an exam out of nowhere, right? I will, if I schedule an exam, of course, I will do it after consulting with you and with your consessor. As long as majority of the class give consent, I will have that exam. Otherwise, no. Okay, so no need to get overly anxious. Okay, all right. So that's that. And what else? I've been responding to like thousands of emails every day. So if you have written to me and I have not responded, wait, your response. I will respond. And if you are asking for something that's beyond me, maybe I have I'm ignore it because there's nothing I can say. So if there are two things can happen, one is I'm yet to get to your email, or number two is I have nothing to say regarding the question you are asking because some things are beyond my control, and there's I can't offer any help. So that's why I don't know what to say. That's why I couldn't respond to some emails. Anyway, so let's get back to business.
Professor,
Yes.
Professor, in the previous class also we actually the Zoom was disrupting very much,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
also I was not getting connections from the morning. So I just this is just a suggestion. If we have alternative option like Google Meet, then I guess at least we can really connect better.
No, that I understand. That's a great suggestion. So I was also thinking about it and using Google Meet, and also maybe use Google Classroom for submitting assignments and also I have been thinking about it. So thank you. Let's see, the thing is, we were told not to, um, because I know if I have the AUW email, then I know who is if no outsider is joining the class. I don't know. I got this email. I just came through it. So we were we're asked to be very cautious about what which platform to use. So I will think about it, to have a Google Meet. But the problem I don't think is because of the Zoom, because they are trying to solve it, and Zoom in general is having a problem worldwide, not just Bangladesh. But I'm sure they will solve it. But my major problem is the internet connection, right? So if for some reason my Wi-Fi doesn't work, I have my phone with me. I always I will log in, but it's going to be very difficult to share something like in the phone. So I don't know what to do about it. um, and also the problem with Mac and iPhone is that all my PowerPoints, these are all PPTs, and there's a anyway, it's a lot of mess. Let's see, let's hope for the best. And thanks, I will have to kind of think of an alternative. But if I get disconnected for some reason, you try, don't go away, keep trying to log in, and hopefully it will work. Okay, so after multiple times, if it doesn't, at least my phone network will work. Okay, all right. So today we are going to talk about a bunch of definitions, and I will let you go early because I can't really speak. This thing is really bothering me. So I will try the apple cider vinegar. Let's see. Okay. So today we are going to talk about like different definitions of labor market. So national labor market, local labor market, and then internal labor market. So these things we will just discuss. So national labor market is a situation where like, the employment and employer matching, like, so employer employee matching happens at the national level. So any application, job application that is advertised in the national daily, right? So those are basically happening at the national scale. So let's say like, any employment that is for any bank, let's say Standard Chartered Bank, even like let's say Dhaka Bank, or I don't know, like any bank that is like, a local bank or international bank, but they will seek applications from the entire country, right? But once they select people, then they will send them to particular localities. But when they hire, they will not hire particularly from any region. They will hire from the national pool, right? So that's the national labor market, when people are hired from the national labor market. And usually like, national labor market is mainly when we talk about very high skilled employment. So like banks, doctors, nurses. So these are like, they happen at the national level, like university professors. So they would not hire from the local market. Local labor market is like, is bounded by a small geographical boundary. So things, jobs like plumbers, right, electricians, and your hair barber, right? So these people, they operate locally. So it's unheard of that like, that you would like, have a electrician that is hired like, nationally through a job search, right? It's not like that. So these people like, they are the local market, it's known by association. So if someone has a small community and there is like two or three electricians, everybody knows them and then they use them. So the market is a small scale, and in a small geographical boundary, and right, mostly like, semi skilled or unskilled workers. So this is not like, high skilled employment sort of labor. And then internal labor market is basically when a firm uses someone within the company to like, fill the position, higher position. So through promotions, when a higher level positions are filled from the company or within the company, we call it internal labor market, right? And this is the norm. So if there is any higher level position open, it should be the ones, like, people who are who would be promoted to secure the top position. That's how it, there's a job ladder, and you go up the ladder as you gain experience and stay with the company, and you get gradually promoted. But sometimes you will see that that doesn't happen. Okay, you will see that whenever there's a vacancy, people within the company is not promoted to secure that position or fill that position. Rather, like, people from outside are basically hired. So just to give you an example, like, um, if if it's a position that is like there might be some controversies in that position. So let's say like, especially in the port areas and the custom areas, you'll see that there's a lot of reshuffling going on. The reason is, if someone stays in these areas, it's very easy to like, get involved in corruption. Okay, since it's very easy to get corruptions, to prevent that, people are reshuffled like, continuously, so that nobody can attach many ties and form a, like, or collude with different stakeholders to engage in corruptions, right? But in like, let's say like, think about AUW for associate deans, or like to promote up to professor level, associate professor level. So they will kind of tend to promote within the, like, within the university. So I started off as an assistant professor, then I was promoted as associate professor. Now they are not making me a professor, but eventually, if I keep on working at AUW, one day I will become a professor. So as soon as any professor's position opens up, I can apply, and I probably they will kind of like, try to fill from within. And if I'm not qualified enough, they will try to hire from outside. But the vice chancellor position with like, it's very unlikely to be filled in by the professors from within. It would be someone coming from outside, right? That's the norm. So if it's inside the like, firm, it's internal labor market. If it's not, then it's external. Okay. There are some benefits of having internal labor market, and the major benefit is it reduces uncertainty. Okay. So can someone tell me like how it reduces uncertainty? Is there anyone who took game theory with me? No? All right.
Professor, since all are in the job, so there is no chance that anyone will be dropped out. That's why there is certainty.
Mm-mm. Not because of that. So yes, one thing is like, you offer someone and then they might not accept. That's not the case. So your point is valid, but the major problem is when you promote someone, it's a higher level position, right? So that means it's a high stake position, that this if this person doesn't perform well enough, the company is going to lose money. So it's a very important position. And if you hire some unknown person, you don't really know whether how capable this person is, because he's coming from outside. But if you promote someone from within, you already have known this person, he has been working so in the company for long hours, so you are very certain about his skill set. And he knows the company, he knows the performance, the company owner, the farm owner knows the performance of this person, the person in consideration, like, the employee in consideration for promotion, he also knows about the operations of the company. So it's a good match, right? So from both sides, from the employer side and from the employee side, they have better information about the candidate, whether the person can actually deliver the work, because you have been observing this person for a long period of time. So there's no uncertainty about his qualification and what he's capable of. At the same time, this person who is going to be promoted, he has no uncertainty about the operations of the company, because he has been working here for long enough time. So he knows the overall, like, everything about the company, the management, how the system works, the operational mechanism, right? So if you stay in an area for a long enough time, like, some little things that outsiders don't know. So this person in that situation, like, there's less uncertainty. And the other benefit of the internal labor market is, when you know that, like, if there is promotion, and through promotion, and you will, like, go to higher and higher level position with a higher salary, it increases person's morale and is an incentive, right? So I would try to work hard, prove myself to my employer that, look, I am working hard, I'm trying to prove myself, I am dedicated, and I will not leave, right? So I'm loyal. As a result, like, keep promoting me, right? So this is a signal that the employer gives to the employee, in the sense that you will be promoted, so work hard. Similarly, the employee also gives a signal that, like, I am working hard, I am loyal, so promote me. So in this situation, it the employee will basically work hard. He will not just shark, or like, like, try to cheat or do anything, because he knows that there's a stake, like there's a carrot that's handing, is incentive that is out there, and if he works really hard, he might actually get that prize. So he would be motivated to work, right? So this is again some benefit, because if you hire from outside, that doesn't happen. The people might be demoralized. Often this happens in AUW, like, people, some faculty, and also the staff, they get demoralized because there is no upward mobility, right? So that, like, that creates a disincentive for people to work hard. All right. Primary
Professor,
labor, yes.
I have a question about the previous slide.
Mm-hmm.
And the first point, reducing hiring and training
Oh, yeah, yeah.
cost.
Hiring,
If we employ,
if you employ from outside, like, so you have to advertise, right? You have to have a hiring committee, they have to interview, and then once this person comes in, you have to train this person to company policies, company practices, all that. So, but if you hire from within, you don't have to advertise in the newspapers, you don't have to train this person, the person is already in, right? So this is
Professor,
like, it reduces hiring and training cost also from the internal labor market.
yeah, but it's like you are shifting from one position to another one. In this case, you need another employee, right? Like you still need to hire someone new
That's the
for the
entry that,
previous position.
what happens in a ladder, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3. So let's say in my ladder there are 3 steps, and like, the person who is in step 3 is the senior most person, right? He retires. If it's an internal labor market, the person who was in step 2 will be promoted to step 3, highest position. Person who was in step 1 will be promoted to step 2. So where is the vacancy? In step 1. Okay.
Yeah.
Internal labor market, is it involved in step 1? Step 1 is the entry position, so it is external labor market. Internal labor market is when the highest step 3 was vacant, there was no hiring from outside for that step 3 position, the highest position. Rather, the person in step 2 was promoted. So this is an internal labor market, and this step 2 person has been already working in the company, so there is no hiring cost. Do you realize the difference?
Not that much.
Professor,
Yeah.
one more thing is like the people who are outside the market, for example, they competent outside the market, for them it is like negative impact, right? Because they are competent, maybe there will be capable people that can hire this position, which the employee already is in the second position is taking the third one. So at the time it is somehow negative impact on their mark as on the.
Do I really care if outside people? So let's say, okay, you understand, third position has become vacant, it's the most senior position, it's like this pyramid. So there are, like, a lot of people in the first step, and then there are few people in the second step, and there is one person in the third step who is basically the senior most boss. He is the senior person, so he retires. Now this position will be filled out from people who are in the second step. Okay, so someone is filled up, and then some people from the first step will move up to the second step. So this is internal labor market. What you are saying is that the third position is vacant. Instead of promoting someone from the second step, we bring in someone from the outside market. And you're saying that if we don't do this, the people who are outside, who are very skilled, they will be discouraged. My question is, this is my farm, right? Do I care if someone outside is discouraged? I rather care if these people who are working for me are discouraged. If they're discouraged, they are not going to work hard. Okay, so I care more about the discouragement and the disincentive of the people who are already within my farm, not some people, there's random people outside. Maybe they're very qualified, right? But I would be concerned about my employees, right? But to, like, to acknowledge your point, sometimes you'll see that usually in the topmost position, especially at the CEO level, you'll see that there are a lot of takeovers. Usually the person who is from inside the farm is, like, isn't promoted to be the topmost position. Rather, someone else is, like, because what happens if someone is, like, there's lots of issues, like, if someone is within your farm.
Professor,
Yes.
I mean, not only about discouragement of the other competent, but also like for the firm itself, if more capable people will come there, it can create benefit for the company.
Excuse me for just a second, right? 1 minute.
Or
hello, I'm sorry, like, there's an emergency. All right, so, excuse me. So you're saying that, like, if you cannot hire the skilled person from outside, the company will lose, right? Because of the skill set, right?
Yes, professor. Also, like the person, of course, there is experience of the employee already. But then nowadays, whatever the thing needed to improve the company itself, at that time it needs some innovatives and new skills, which I think that the fresh graduates are those people can do it more.
What you are saying is the eternal logic of the fresh graduates. They think that we are the best and we should be given the topmost position, right? I understand and I sympathize, but that's not how the world works. Okay. It only works where, it works in the STEM industry. So if you are like extremely talented and if you develop a vaccine, let's say you are a first fresh PhD, but in your research you found a vaccine for, let's say, corona, or so immediately you will be like, made head of a huge research organization or a pharmaceuticals. That is for exceptional people, but for in general people like us, what will happen is we have to kind of go through the ladder. You start off at the entry level, and then if you are
That's
really,
true.
if you are very smart, you can move up the ladder very quickly. But if you like, but what happens, like some jobs, so that's why, like, some jobs is like very easy to move up, but some jobs is very difficult to go up the ladder. It takes years to get promoted, right? So that is, again, it creates a lot of, like, employees become demoralized. If there is no promotion, you're stuck at the same position for years and years. People get demoralized, right? So that's a huge cost to the firm if their employees are demoralized. And people from outside, the point I was trying to make is that if someone is at the company, same company for a long period of time, he can form, like, relationship with different, like, section. Every farm has different sections, right? And if someone, so, and then there is always, every farm has some check and balance, right? Someone takes attendance, someone checks if he has, like, involved in any sort of corruption, if he submitted his returns, like, uh, perfectly or not. The longer you stay, right, these checks and balance becomes blurry for these people, because they have been there for a long time and everybody knows them, and they go and request, oh, I was absent yesterday, but just mark it present for me, right? And since they're there, they have been colleagues for long enough time, these things keep on happening, so little corruption starts creeping in. These are not very good examples, but you understand what I'm saying, right? The employer doesn't want any of this. So that is another problem also from hiring from within, but this problem is negligible compared to the benefits. Okay, so these are certain benefits, and obviously, like, there are lots more, but let's just stick to, like, this for a second, and as we go along, when we talk about real life scenarios, you can bring in more examples. All right. Primary labor market. So primary labor market, they could talk about hiring process where it's very, like, high wages and stable employment and very high skilled employment. So primary labor market is employment from professors, doctors, nurses, engineers, right? Like high skilled, high, and it's very stable. So people are not, the turnover rate is less. So they are hired for a longer contract. Okay. Secondary labor market is, like, students working in a pizza shop or any fast food restaurant. There, this is a part-time sort of, like, employment, or employment for a transition period. So I am in between jobs. I don't have anything, so I go and work for a, like, till I find something better to do, right? Or I freshly graduated, I'm looking for a better opportunity, or I'm going to go out for higher studies. In between, let me just, like, do something. So these type of labor market where wages are very low and the turnover rate is very high, right? So very unstable employment relationship, low wage rate, these are called secondary labor market. And you'll see that the skill set is like, in the primary labor market, it's high skilled employment. In the secondary labor market is like, unskilled employment. Okay. All right. So now the definition of labor force. Labor force is like, constitutes of people who are non-institutionalized. That means like, they are not in some sort of mental asylum or anything. So they are rational agents who are age 16 or above, okay, who are either working or actively seeking work. My mom made a cake, right? So I'm sorry, I'm nibbling, like, shouldn't be. But that's the, again, some perks of like having online course. I don't have to change my dress, like, I just showered and just prayed, so and I came. This is not going to happen if I'm like in the campus, right? All right. So labor force by definition is constitutes of the people who are non-institutionalized and who are age 16 and above, who are either working or actively seeking work. So this is basically very important, that actively seeking work. When you first hear the word labor force, it generally means that people who are working. But labor force also constitutes of the people who are looking for work. They may not have a job yet, but they are actively looking for one. So they are unemployed, but they are looking for work. So similarly, the following definition is unemployed: people who are not working, but they are looking for work. Okay. In the labor force, people who are basically who are students, full-time students, like you guys are. You guys are above age 16, but you are not in the labor force because you have a full-time occupation. That is, you are students, right? So you will not be like, in the labor force. And the other sad part is women who are housemakers, like homemakers, they're 16 and they are working from like 6 a.m. in the morning till like 12 at night, but they're not part of the labor force. So their services are not accounted for, even though they are working at home, but they're not part of the labor force. Okay. And then unemployment rate.
Professor,
Yes. Go ahead.
Professor, those who take EMBA course, we see them doing their job, fully professional job, and then they do the evening MBA course. So can we really count them in the labor force?
Yes, they are working. This is part. So they are EMBA, they are part-time students. They are not full-time students, but you guys are full-time students, right? There's a difference.
Yes, Professor.
You are supposed to take classes all day and read the other times when you don't have classes, or like, engage in club activities and stuff. You're not supposed to be working full-time in another job, right? You're supposed to be full-time students, and maybe you can do some part-time. Like when I was a student, I don't know about you guys, I never took any money from my parents, right? From grade, like, in Bangladesh, there's like the two scholarship. One is at grade 5, and then when I was like, now it's different. I don't even know now what's the rule. But in grade 5 and grade 8, and then grade 10, and then grade 12. So I got scholarships in 5, 8, 10, and 12. So that covered my tuition for since I got in 5, so 6, 7, 8 were covered. I got in 8, so 9, 10 were covered. I got in 10, so 11, 12 were covered. And I got in 12 also, so I got like, a lump sum money, right? So, and in my school, the school I went to, if you are in the first 3 position, first, second, third, they would give you as a incentive, right? As a prize, they would give you the 1 year's or worth of salary at the end of the year if you become like. So I used to get that as well. So basically, not only I studied for free, I also got money. Okay. And then when I was like, I always used to like, tutor kids who are younger than me. Even when I was in university, I used to, when I was in third year, I used to coach students of second year and first year. Okay, so so I was full-time student, but I was like, you know, earning part-time. Okay, I think like, you know, it's better if you, I really would encourage you to do some part-time work. The easiest is to, like, you know, act as a tutor of some kid, right? Or someone who's one, especially someone who's 1 year junior to you, because you've just learned the material, it's fresh in your head, and it's challenging. If you teach someone who's in kindergarten, right, you are not learning anything. But if you teach someone who's just, like, you know, who's just immediately 1 year below you, you learn a lot, right? You'll be amazed how much you understand when you teach someone rather than when you were learning it for yourself. So please do that, and you'll see that everything will change, right? And you'll become independent, which is very good. Okay, so labor force and unemployed, is there any confusion in these two definitions? Okay, unemployment rate is defined by the number of people who are looking for jobs but don't have a job, divided by the number of people who are 16 and above, who are working or looking for work. Okay, so is it possible that the denominator will ever be bigger than the numerator?
No, Professor.
No, because the denominator has people who are working plus people who are working looking for jobs, and the numerator is people who are looking for jobs. So this will always be a ratio. Okay, and since it's a rate, we multiply it by this ratio by 100. Okay, okay. Discouraged workers are workers who, like, you know, who are unemployed for such a long time. They have been looking for work, but after a while they become discouraged and they give up looking for work. So they give up, like, you know, they give up their hope and they drop out of the labor market. Okay, if the numerator, so the discouraged worker is the people who are unemployed but they are leaving the labor force, they decide that they will not look for a job. So what will happen? The numerator will become smaller, the denominator will also become smaller, but the numerator will become smaller at a higher rate than the denominator. So as a result, the unemployment rate will go down. Does it make sense? When you have a
Yes,
big
Professor.
number, a small change is, this percentage change is going to be small, right? Remember, in principles class, I taught you this. So what will happen is the unemployed persons, because discouraged worker is a huge chunk taken out from the numerator, it will fall at a faster rate than the denominator, because denominator also has people who are already working and they are not leaving, right? So the decline rate of decline in the denominator will be smaller. Okay, all right. Labor force participation rate, labor force divided by population of the country. Okay, so labor force is the people who are 16, people who are not in a mental institution, who are 16 and above, who are 16 and above, right, working or looking for job. And population is the entire population of the country. Okay, when there is an economic expansion, the economy is doing really well, right? New industries are being established, the government is giving incentives, and so in that situation, what will happen? New job opportunities will open up, and labor force participation rate will increase, because number of people finding work and number of people finding a job will increase. And when the job rate, the salary will also increase, that will encourage more people to actively look for work. So as a result, the labor force rate will increase. But what happens during a recession? In a recession, like now we are going through a recession because of corona, what is happening? All the companies are like laying off people, they are shutting down branches, right? Their small businesses are closing. So as a result, the unemployment rate is actually increasing. right? And then since unemployment rate is increasing, so what will happen, right? The unemployment rate is increasing, and they are also in the labor force. So basically, excuse me, labor force participation rate will actually go down. Okay, because these people cannot find job and they will become discouraged and they will leave the market also. Okay, so as a result, when there is a recession, a lot of people are laid off. So labor force in general, people looking for work, and people, because people, if you're in recession, in a normal time you're finding it difficult to, you're finding it difficult to land a job, and in a recession there is no opportunity for you to find a job. So basically some people become discouraged, so they don't look for their jobs anymore. At the same time, a lot of people are being laid off, so the labor force participation rate itself shrinks when there is a recession. Okay, and it's like, the labor force participation rate is highly correlated with the business cycle. So when the business cycle is on the, like, going towards the peak, right? So that means the economy is expanding, so the unemployment, labor force participation rate will rise. When the economy is going down, heading towards a recession, and so in that situation, basically the unemployment rate will rise. Okay, so it follows very similar to this. So this is like, a picture of the US labor force rate, just to give you some examples. So this is basically the population. Population is divided into people who are in the labor force. That means people who are working and people who are looking for jobs. And so the people who are employed plus the unemployed. And then we have people who are not in the labor force, right? So these people who are retirees, who are in full-time students, who are housewives, right? Who are dependent children, right? Or people who are in the mental institution, or people who are physically disabled for some reason. Okay, so the population is divided into two parts: people who are in the labor force and people who are not in the labor force. But obviously, if someone who is in the labor force who retires, then they move into the second group, right? Or like, if someone is looking for work for a long time and becomes discouraged, then they move into the, like, in the second group. Okay, but and then some housewife, they might think, okay, I've been a housewife for a long time, my kid is now off to school, let me start looking for a job. So she now joins the labor force. So there's a lot of like interconnectivity, or like, exchange between labor force and people who are not in the labor force. In the labor force, there are two groups: the people who already have landed a job, who have a job, and then the second group is who are actively looking for a job, but they don't have it, right? So, or they're waiting for a um, they probably have passed some screening and they're waiting to hear from the employer, right? So again, from these two groups, some people who are employed today can be unemployed tomorrow, and some people who are unemployed today can be employed tomorrow. So there are lots of, like, layoffs and hiring basically links the two groups. Okay, so this is basically just to give you a snapshot of the various, like, categories in the labor force. Okay. So this is just some trends, and I am just going to give you so these are certain things you can look for yourself, and this is very interesting. Okay, so this is male and female labor force participation rate. This is for US, because all textbooks are written by people in US, so they use their own data. It's interesting. In one of my classes, I asked students to kind of collect the data. So the assignment was basically like, I taught that as a writing intensive. So I asked them, so all the slides that I present in each lecture, so the job was I assigned different countries to different students, and they would research for their country, collect data, and create all these graphs for me. And then write little, like, maybe half a paragraph of an explanation. So that was actually very useful experience, better than exams. But you understand, like, with a class of 40, it's very difficult to do it. But I strongly encourage you to do it. If you really want to, like, join some research organization, right? Or work from some think tank, or if you want to go to graduate school, these are very good exercise, right? Like you collect data and then try to see if the trend is different than US or very similar to US, something like do some sort of inter-country comparison, which is a very good exercise. Now look what's happening. The red line is the male labor force participation, yellow line is the female labor force participation, and green line is the like combined for all. So you can see that, like, over time, the green line has been stable over time, and like, in the, like, in the recent years, it's just increasing a little bit. But it again becomes stable. So it's come a little bit flat, and over the years, obviously, like, there's an economic expansion, and so the participation rate is increasing. Population is also increasing. Economies are growing, so there is a lot more participation, but in general, the green line is more or less stable. What's striking is look at the gap between the red line and the yellow line starting at 1950s. So immediately after Second World War, there's a huge gap between male participation and female participation, right? But then what happens over time, you see that the gap has actually narrowed down, right? Male participation is declining and female participation is gradually increasing. Okay, who can tell me why this is happening?
Professor, what I learned from one of the history is that in the Second World War, when the basically the soldiers were forced to when the soldiers were basically forced to leave for war and leave their workstation, then the female were encouraged to do work, and they have basically made various kinds of posters. That is, there is one famous poster which we basically use in Halt Price. I forgot the name of that character, but that is basically to show the women empowerment, and that is how they basically collected many women in the workforce after this in the second during the time of Second World War. I think that is the fallout of this kind of result in future.
Yes, it's a good starting point. Well done. So what happened is when men went out to fight the war, right? The economy had to run, right? They are fighting in the shores of Europe. Okay. So what happened is, this is American data. Okay. So what happened then? The women stepped up, right? So they started working. Okay, especially in the essential industries, food, agriculture, and then there are a lot of, like, to supply to the army, right? So in the garments industry, that prepared the clothes, and then food processing industry. So when there is a big war, certain industries accelerate, and women basically stepped up and they took over all the secretary positions and all those. They started work. But after the war, this is 1950, right? So after the World War, there was a shortage of men, obviously, right? A lot of men died in the war. Number two is, so that's one thing. And number
Professor,
yeah.
I just want to add one thing. What I also learned is that during 1940, basically during 1943, when basically America went for the war, then some industries were strategically laid off worker. It's due to to encourage them to participate in the armed force, because now they don't have job. That's the reason why basically the man in America joined in the army or navy.
No, but there is a draft, right? In US, what happens is the army drafts people, and then when they do it, they have to go. It's not like, unless you have a serious medical reason, you cannot avoid that. In Korea, you know that, right? They have to do 2 years of mandatory drafting, but in US, it happens like, through a random draw. If you are called through the draft, you have to. You cannot, like, like, somehow escape that unless you have a compelling reason. So your point is right. And also some of the industries, obviously, maybe they laid off or maybe they shut down because, like, there were not enough skills or there's not enough demand for their products. So many things happened. But what happened is the male labor force because of the war, because of close down of certain industries, right? They declined. A lot of male were like, they were disabled, they were amputated. So like lots of things happened. So male, immediately after the war, it declined a little bit. But the women who went out to the work in the market, not all of them returned home, even when the men returned. So that's number one. Number two, what happened is, like, during this time, a lot of service sector opened up. Okay, so these housewives, when they, before they did not know, but now they realize that each hour that they stay, like, outside, they stay at home, they're losing this opportunity of earning money. So their opportunity cost of time, it became like, and then immediately after the World War II, like, all the economy started growing, right? So basically the opportunity cost of their time at home actually started rising, and they started realizing that they should actually start working. And the other thing is, like, the divorce rate actually increased. So what happened is, like, traditionally single men, widowed, or like, or single who never got married, they were always participating in the labor market, right? So the females, but the married women did not work. After the Second World War II, because they started working, because they had to provide for their family when the men were out, the married women also started working. And the divorce rate actually, because with the rise of the divorce rate, they had to work, because they had to provide for themselves. So that, and also because the service sector. So a combination of all of these things, like, a rise in their wage rate, and also, like, opportunity cost of time, and the increase in divorce rate, compel these women to work, like, participate more in the labor market, and as a result, it increased. Now look what is happening by age group, right? So you see that women who are, like, older women, their performance level, like, their participation rate did not change at all. But look what is happening to the younger women, right? The younger women and the women in their middle age. So basically these women, there's a sharp increase in their participation. On all the other three groups, all the other three age groups, even though the slope is different, right? For the, let's say, 55 and 65, they, are you killing someone? What is happening? Anyway, so don't get angry at your husband, right? It's not his fault, right? Anyway, so what is happening is a steep rise in the younger group, right? Because by that time the female literacy rate and also the college female education level also increased. So these women were college educated with a university degree, right? They started working. There's a high divorce rate, so they, and a lot of women stayed single, right? The marriage rate went down, divorce rate went up, and they became highly educated. So as a result, the participation rate increased sharply. For men, so the war kind of describes, like, but what happens is also this steady decline is interesting. The reason behind this steady decline is men were, remember, like, men were relatively, now even till today, men on an average have higher education than women. Okay, and during the 80s, right, what happened, there is a, if you remember, there is a dot-com bubble, right? Everyone was in the computer software business, right? So what happened is, these were really high paying jobs, and the economies were growing, and the finance, because of globalization, the capital market became huge, right? So the, like, Nasdaq, and, like, all the world became connected because of the financial trading, the capital flow between countries, and these were high stake, high paying jobs. So men started retiring early. Okay, so because they're retiring early, right, they were dropping out of the labor force. So as a result, male participation rate declined. Women were mostly in either, like, service industry, teaching, like, becoming nurses, or so they were mostly in service industry or doctor or something. So they were like, they were stable, good paying jobs, but they were not like, exceptionally rich. So they were not dropping out. So they were rises steady. But for men, because they're retiring early, then because they earned so much money in these particular industries as the economy opened up, right? As a result, this decline started happening. Okay. So this is basically some trends. So by race, this is obviously, you can see that there's not much difference, right? But you can see that always the minorities, they work a lot, and because they are from the poorer background, it's always a dual income household, right? So as a result, you will see that their participation rate is a little bit higher. And the male participation rate, as you can see, it's the trend is like, same, but the like black participation rate, or the like, the minority group is lower than like, the white, the majority group. Okay, because of the education difference also, the minorities have less skills compared to the whites. Okay, all right. So this is very important, and it's true. This is for US, right? Whatever we are saying, but it's now, if you look back, the same trend is applicable to the rising Asian countries, right? The countries follow very similar trajectory of growth. Okay. So the primary sector is the agricultural sector. Okay. Over time, because of mechanization in agriculture, this share of labor force of the agriculture has become like, smaller and smaller and smaller. So there's a steady decline in agriculture because of massive mechanization in agriculture. Agricultural sector has become very efficient, very productive, and because of mechanization, it required less and less labor. Industry sector has like, it started growing immediately after the World War, but then obviously it becomes steady, right? And um, also there's a lot of mechanization in the industrial sector as well. So basically, but obviously you need, like, think about the car industry. So their industry is basically like car industry and some heavy, like, heavy machinery industries. What happened is there has to be some ratio of labor to capital, because one is not a substitute, they are rather complementary. So even though it declined with mechanization, but not as much, a slight decline. The massive influx or the massive growth was in the tertiary sector, right? People, when, okay, if my internet is showing that is unstable, if it disconnects, log back again. Okay, so tertiary sector is the service sector. There's a sharp increase in the service sector, like, and also like with time, what happened is, with the higher income level of the country, people like, started eating out more, right? The restaurant business, they started vacationing more, they started going out, right? They started going to the dentist more, they started, for the littlest thing they would go and consult a doctor. There were lots of cosmetic things were done. So people became like, a consumer. So the consumerism played a huge role in terms of the expansion of the tertiary sector. As a result, unemployment rate in the tertiary sector increased in a massive level. Okay. So I'm not going to go into all of these things, and these are certain things, you are the mechanization, all the things that I've already said. This is very important. Nominal and real wage. Who can tell me the difference?
Real wage doesn't basically adjust inflation, where nominal wage doesn't adjust inflation.
Excellent. So yes, nominal
for
wage
example,
does not account for inflation. Real wage accounts for inflation. So real wage, how do you get real wage? You divide the nominal wage for this year. So for every year, so this year you divide the nominal wage by consumer price index. So what is consumer price index?
that is all the products that a consumer take, which is basically count in a basket. So that is
it's a particular selection of commodities in a basket, right? So the cost of the same basket in the base year and the cost of the same basket in the current year. So you divide the cost of the current price divided by the cost of the base price, and that's how you get your price index. And when you divide your nominal wage rate by the price index, you get the real wage rate. Okay, I'm sure you did this in macro, right?
Yes, Professor.
Okay.
Professor.
All right. So here are some definition. I know this chapter is all about definition. We will get into theorems like, soon, but like, let's just finish with the definitions first. Okay. So the wage rate is payment per unit of time. So if you work like hourly, so it would be like, per hour salary, right? Or per hour wage rate. Okay. Your earnings is if you work 40 hours a day, 40 hours a week, and your earning is, let's say your wage rate is 10 taka, so your earning is 10 into 40, 10 taka per hour times 40 hours. So this is your earnings. Your total compensation is earnings plus fringe benefits. Fringe benefits is basically payments in kind and deferred compensation. Payments in kind, like, in certain industries you'll see that if you work, let's say, in a company that produces some, like, that produces what, let's say it produces strawberry jelly. Okay, now they every month you get your earnings, which is your wage times the hour, but they also give you a five box of strawberry jelly. Okay, so that's one thing. But the major thing is they also give you uniforms. In most in certain jobs they are given uniforms, right? They are given, like for us, like, they allow us to buy books, buy softwares, right? So those are also like certain benefits. If I had to spend my own money, then, like, it's a cost to me. But if the university buys it for me, like, a laptop or a printer or a software, these are payments in kind. And deferred compensation, like, it in AUW the rule is 5% of our salary is our deferred compensation. So when I leave AUW, every year that I was with AUW, 5% of my salary will be given to me as a sort of a retirement benefit, right? But it's not, it will not be given to me right now. It will be given to me only when I leave, right? Or only when I retire. So it's kind of like a retirement payment. Okay. Income is your total compensation plus unearned income, right? So together. So what is total compensation? Total compensation is your total income for hours that you have spent working, plus all the in-kind payments and the deferred compensation, everything. And what I mean by unearned income is, let's say you have some stocks, right? So you get, like, some interest payment, or if you say, if your stock values rise, you get some money out of your stock prices. So those are, or like every year the company where you have stocks, they send you some interest payment or some benefits, right? So these are, you don't have to work for them. Just because you have some company shares, they pay you dividends. So those are your unearned income. Or, like, sometimes what happens is, if you are from a very wealthy family, your family, you inherit some money from your family, and they give you some monthly allowance. You don't have to work for that allowance. Just because you are, like, from that family and every member gets an allowance, you get it, and so that's your income. But you didn't have to spend any hours working for it, right? But for the earnings part, you had to work for it, because it's a part of your hours, the number of hours you have spent working. Okay, so this is basically the definition of income and earnings. Okay. All right, so this is basically, like, it's the same thing. If you have the wage rate times the number of hours worked gives you earning, you add your employee benefits in kind of deferred payment, that gives you total compensation, and you add your earned income like interest, dividends, government transfer payments equal to your income. The government transfer payment is important in their context because in US, if you are a single mom who is who has a dependent child, right? You get you get some money from the government. Sometimes the government gives this help, the transfer is in food stamps, so they are given some tickets and they can buy certain food item with those tickets. So basically they do, instead of cash, they they give the tickets to the grocery store, right? So they act as a, they act as cash but can only be spent on food. Okay, so because otherwise what happens is these in US the teenage and the drugs problem are a serious concern. So if money is given to these young women, they might actually go into basically spend it on things that are not beneficial to them or for their child. Rather, if you give the money to be spent on food item, and not only that any food item, it has to be particular food item, like especially for the child. So they receive these cash payments. If you add everything together, you get your total income. Okay. Before we go move into the demand side, any questions so far? No? Okay, I will just introduce demand and then I will let you go. Okay, so demand, labor demand is like any demand curve that you have studied, in principles of micro. So it's a downward sloping demand curve like any other demand curve. So what does labor demand curve show you? It shows the labor demand associated with every possible wage rate. Who is demanding the labor? The farms, the employers are demanding labor. And who is supplying labor? Us, the workers are supplying labor. So the roles have switched. Don't confuse the two, right? Often people confuse the two. So the labor demand curve shows the quantity demanded of labor for each wage rate. Okay. Why is it downward sloping? When the wage rate is high, right, the employers do not want to hire many workers. They want to substitute with capital. When the wage rate is low, they want to hire more workers and use labor to substitute for capital. Okay. Labor demand curve is downward sloping because of two things, exactly like product demand curve: substitution effect and scale effect. What do I mean by substitution effect? When the wage rate is high, so relatively speaking, compared to the price of capital, if the wage rate is high, the farm will, because capital is relatively cheaper, the farm will try to substitute capital, substitute labor with capital, right? So it will fire workers and employ more capital. Okay, that means the farm is laying off workers and employing more and more capital. So that is substitution effect because of a higher wage rate. Scale effect means when the wage rate rises, there are several things are happening. So higher wage rate results in higher cost of production, right? Because obviously if the input prices increases, it will just trickle down to the cost of production being raised, right? When the cost of production rises, it will lead to then the farm cannot sell at a lower price, right? So they have to charge a higher price, so that will result to a higher equilibrium price for the product. Okay, so when the price of the product is high, in the product market what will happen? When price of something is very high, consumers will demand less of it. So higher price of the product will reduce the demand, and when demand is lower, that means the farm cannot sell many output, so it will reduce its total production. So when it reduces its total production, the demand for labor and capital both will go down because it can't sell its product, so it's going to produce less, so it will require less labor and less capital. So this is scale effect. With a higher wage rate, right, due to scale effect, both labor demand and capital demand will go down. And with substitution effect, because of higher wage rate, the farm will substitute capital instead of labor, so the labor demand will go down. So when wage rate rises, both substitution effect and scale effect will be working in the same direction, and they will reduce the labor demand. Okay, is that clear? Hello, are you guys with me?
Yes, Professor.
Yes,
Okay,
Professor. Yes,
so we
Professor.
see that the wage rate and the labor quantity of labor demanded is inversely related. So when wage rate rises because of substitution and scale effect, labor demand goes down. And when wage rate falls, right? When wage rate becomes lower, what will happen? It will become relatively cheaper compared to capital. So in that case, the firm will hire more workers and substitute labor with capital, substitute labor for capital, right? So they will lay off capital and hire more workers. So labor demand will increase. And when, like, wage rate rises, the overall cost of production will fall. Since cost of production will fall, the firm can actually charge a lower price for their output. As a result, when price of the product is lower, demand will increase. When there is higher demand, the firm can produce more, right? Because they want to, when there is higher demand, they can produce and sell more. So they, to produce more, they need to hire more workers. So when there is lower wage rate, labor demand curve will increase. So we see that because of substitution and scale effect, wage rate and the labor demand are moving in opposite direction. As a result, the labor demand curve is downward sloping. Okay, okay, so let's first talk about movement. So we see the labor demand curve. It shows the relationship between the negative or the inverse relationship between wage rate and quantity of labor demanded. Okay, so if the wage rate rises, you move along the labor demand curve, right? So that's a movement along the labor demand curve. Quantity demanded will decline with a higher wage rate, but you move along the labor demand curve. When the wage rate falls, you move downwards along the labor demand curve and quantity demanded will rise, right? But, like, there might be certain things that actually will cause a shift in the labor demand curve. Okay, so anything that has an impact on quantity of labor demanded will cause a shift in the labor demand curve, keeping the wage rate constant. Okay, so let's say, like, we are talking about the pharmaceuticals. Because of corona, the demand for medicines have gone up because everybody is scared and they are storing medicine, right? Everybody, anywhere in the world, there, if you, because medicines is something, it's a necessary good, right? So everybody is, like, storing their medicines. So what is happening? There's a huge increase in demand for medicine. As a result, the pharmaceutical companies are producing more and more, right? That means they are hiring more and more workers. So what is happening? The entire, because there's no change in wage rate, so the shift in the labor demand curve is happening because of the product demand. Because there's an increase in product demand, people are basically buying more of the product that in the x-axis. As a result, there is a shift in the labor demand curve. If there is an increase in price of capital, what will happen? There's no change in the wage rate, but increase in price of capital. So in that case, like, since price of capital went up, right, relatively speaking, labor is cheaper. So the firm will hire more workers. Since price of capital is higher, overall cost of production will increase. As a result, like, the firms will basically, through scale effect, because cost of production increases, price will increase, demand will go down, right? So this is a little bit tricky. Okay, since capital is expensive, the substitution effect says increase labor demand. But since capital is expensive, the scale effect is saying that reduce labor demand. They are working in opposite direction. If the substitution effect is stronger than the scale effect, then the labor demand curve is going to shift to the right. Right? If it's the other way around, then it's going to shift to the left. Okay, but it's going to be a shift. It's not going to be a movement along the labor demand curve. Okay, does it make sense?
Yes,
Yes,
Professor.
Professor.
Okay. So this is again like, an industry's demand for labor consists of total demand for a particular type of worker in a given industry. Okay. So a particular type, remember, industry labor demand is a particular demand for a particular type of a worker in given industry. Okay. So a particular type of output. And the industry's labor demand curve is determined by adding together labor demand curve for all firms in the industry. So let's say like, a carpenter or a plumber is easier. A plumber is required, right, in education, because in our AUW we need a plumber. In the construction you need it, like, everywhere you need a plumber, right? So if you think about the plumbing industry, this plumber is working in many different places. Okay, so you add this, every firm that employs this particular type of worker, you add their demand to get the industry, the plumbing industry's labor demand curve. Okay, okay, and the market demand curve. Market demand curve for a given category of labor consists of all the firms that might hire a given type of labor regardless of the industry in which the firm operates. Okay. So this particular firm can operate in many industries, right? So let's say like, to what would I give an example of? So let's say a nurse, right? A nurse is employed in like, the all the hospitals, but a nurse is also employed in garments industry. Nurse is also employed in like, everywhere. So regardless of the firm that this particular labor is working, the market demand for nurses will be adding together like, all the industry demand. So like, the nurses are demanded in, let's say, education industry, nurses are demanded in like, garments industry, nurses are demanded in the hospitality, they are demanded in medical, like, like, what do you call it, the hospital or the treatment industry, whatever you call it. So you add their demand throughout and you get the market demand. It's very similar. Remember, like, how did we get to like the market demand curve? We added individual demand horizontally to get to the market demand curve. It's the same concept. The same type of worker can be working in many different industries. To get to the market demand curve, you add everyone, like, every firm that's operating in different industries, but adding together every demand for that particular type. But you cannot add nurses with male nurses with female nurses, right? Or you cannot add doctors with nurses. You cannot add apples with orange. You have to say, okay, this particular profession and this person can be hired in many sectors. To figure out the market demand for nurses, we have to add the sectors or the industries that are employing this particular type of nurses, right? So it's very similar, but this is a little bit different because now we are talking about many industries hiring the same profession. Okay, all right. And then I think this is, I'm not going to go into supply, so let me just like, finish here. Okay, so what do you think? These if you can see that the short run labor demand curve is much steeper than the long run labor demand curve. Labor demand curve is much flatter. So what does that mean? Steeper and flatter. What do I mean by this?
Elasticity. No.
Very good. In the long run, it's more elastic. In the short run, it's inelastic, right? Very good, Anika. So this is in the short run, labor demand is inelastic, but in the long run, labor demand is more flexible. So a small change in wage rate will cause a lot of shift in the long run labor demand, but in the short run, the employers or the firms cannot adjust. So they are basically cannot lay off. If the wage rate rises, Even if the wage rate rises, they cannot fire a lot of people. Can someone tell me why? Why is the long run demand is more flexible and more elastic compared to the short run?
I think in the short term, like in disasters or anything can happen. Like if you can think about the situation like COVID-19, that's a short term. So we can see that the people's cut off of the from the uh, job could be happen. So it could be more inelastic. But when it's we can see like a 10 years long period of time, then we can see that that's more elastic and that's more yeah. I think, ma'am, I understand this.
um, I'm sure what Anika is trying to say is that in the short run, right, you don't have much opportunities. The employers, right? So you are, let's say, you're working in Chittagong. Let's say a garments industry working in Chittagong, right? If the wage rate rises, right, it's going to be difficult for them to kind of immediately, like lay off a significant or find a lot of capital, right? Because capital, that is a fixed asset, so a fixed factor of production. So it's because the wage rate rises, they want to substitute labor with capital, but to procure capital they require more time, so they cannot immediately adjust their behavior. But in the long run, what happens is there's enough time. So if the wage rate rises, because it's a long run scenario, time is not a problem, right? So they can substitute, they can hire more capital and fire more workers. So they are more flexible. They can actually lay off a lot of worker in the long run. But in the short run, because it's going to be very difficult for them to get capital in a short notice, so they cannot fire a lot of workers. So it's more like inelastic. So it's more rigid. In the long run, it's more flexible because there's no time constraint. Okay, it's easy to let go of your capital. Remember, in the short run, we talked about in principles class that in the short run, you're stuck with your fixed capital. You cannot change your fixed asset or fixed factor of production, right? So those, or the machinery, you're stuck with them. So if you cannot immediately procure or you cannot let go, so in the short run, your flexibility is less. In the long run, you have greater flexibility. Okay, that's why the long run labor demand curve is much flatter and more elastic, and in the short run labor demand curve is inelastic and much steeper. Okay, we will talk about this in
Professor,
greater detail when we talk about elasticity. This is just warming you up. Yes, go ahead.
Professor, I have a question, which is
Yeah.
that I have found in the article, in the news, basically yesterday, that around 48,000 garments workers were laid down and 300 factories were shut down. So
Yeah.
in this case, this is a finding by Bangladesh Labor Institute survey. So they have found this thing. So we can see that within very short time, this kind of scenario actually emerged.
But
So
this is
is it
a problem, Anika. I understand.
yeah.
This is a great point, but what is happening? This layoff is happening not because of the wage rate, Anika. This labor demand curve, what do you have in the x-axis and y-axis? In the x-axis, you have quantity of labor demanded. In the y-axis, you have wage rate. It has the wage rate is the minimum wage rate is set by the government, and there's a lot of the industry individually cannot actually fluctuate a lot of the wage rate. Whatever happened, these layoff, right, and the shutdown of these companies, this happened because of corona. That is nothing to do with the wage rate. Okay, so the so that data, right, the one that you have read, it's not really directly related to what we are saying here because the variables are different. Okay, all right, now tell me
Yes, Professor.
what you wanted to say, that in because of COVID this happened. So yes, so this is, so what you're saying is excellent because this is related more to this, right? So there will be, because of COVID, all these factories are laying off workers and they are shutting down because they are losing their orders, what happened is in the West, they get the manufacturing sector or the garment sector, they receive orders from abroad, right? Because of COVID, these people are not like, they're canceling their orders. So as a result, these local garments industries are basically they don't have any order, or their orders were cancelled, they suffered a loss, so they are laying off workers or like shutting down. So that will cause a leftward shift in the labor demand, because it has nothing to do with the wage rate. This has something to do with some external force, right, causing a reduction in quantity of labor demand. So this shift, when there's a shift, what will we say? There is a change in demand, or there's a reduction in demand. And when you move along the demand curve, what do we say? That there is an increase or there is a decrease, because it is in response to higher wage rates. So there's a decrease in quantity of labor demanded, right? Remember, in principles class, it's the same thing. When there is a shift, we will say there is a reduction in labor demand, or a change in labor demand, or a shift in labor demand. But when there is a movement, then we will say like there is a change in quantity of labor demanded, right? So these, again, the same jargons apply in the labor market as well. Okay, anything else?
Professor, one interesting thing I found also in that news, even after we are facing this corona, but the exports of Bangladesh increased by 45.8% year on year. And this was basically claimed by the head of RMG sector, BGMEA, and also the DIFG. So they are talking that that is 45.8% has increased, export has increased. So I was just wondering that two contrasting type of thing I'm getting here.
Okay, so the export is increasing. Why do you think? Because why? Okay,
Professor,
let me give you a hint.
Yeah,
Okay, Bangladesh doesn't produce high-end products, right? Bangladesh supplies to which? Walmart, right? It's a low-end, low-cost garments, right? Target. So Bangladesh, the majority product that Bangladesh produces and exports are actually lower-end products, right? They don't produce the high-end, the the top end or the very expensive products. So when there is a recession worldwide, there will be a higher demand for lower end product, right? Everybody would want to buy cheaper products. So everybody needs clothes. Clothes is a basic necessity. So what happened is the demand for lower end product or cheaper product from Bangladesh actually increased, and as a result, export increased even after Corona. But the garments, so again, remember, it's a comparative advantage. So the garments industry, those were like producing higher end products, like maybe like fur jackets or very expensive undergarments and those things, right? So there is a less demand for high end product, very expensive products. So there will be layoff and closing down of those garments factories that are producing very high and expensive products. But majority of the Bangladeshi garments industries produce low end products, right? So as a result, the demand for these would increase, and there will be higher orders for these lower end products. Okay, so that's why. And you know what, nowadays in Corona, what is happening? Everybody is shopping online. Nobody is going to the malls, and some of the stores are actually closed, right? So if you are buying online, there's a lot of uncertainty, because what if like you see a picture, what if like you don't, the actual color when it arrives at your door is not like nothing matches to the picture you have seen, or the fitting, because you can't test, you can't go into a trial room, right? So people are very skeptical, and they don't want to spend much money, they don't want to risk it. So they usually buy cheaper products. Okay, if it doesn't fit well, it's only 10 taka, who cares, right? So they have this attitude towards a lower cost product. But if it's very expensive, then you will think twice about buying it. Because of Corona, people are shopping online. So the lower end products are sold in volumes, and the higher end products, their demand has gone down. And also because of this, also the lower end products that Bangladeshi garments industries produce, they are in high demand, and as a result their export has increased. Okay, so you might say it's contradictory. It's actually not, because you are looking at the aggregate numbers. If you disaggregate by which sectors or which industries are losing, like, laying off people and closing down, versus which are actually increasing their production and hiring more workers, you will understand why this is happening, the underlying dynamics. Okay.
Yes, Professor.
Okay, any other question?
No, Professor.
Okay, so let's just end now. um, if you guys have time, there is a, like, website called openstacks.com, OPENSTAX, openstacks.com. It's a online, like, free book service offered by Rice University. Rice University is one of the top universities in Texas. There are many books, but not so much in labor. But if you look at any principles book, right, there is one chapter in labor, right, labor market. If it's possible, you read through this, and all the things that we have covered here today, that chapter will cover most of it, right? So next week you will have access to your own course pack and your own textbook. But in the meanwhile, if you want to study, you can just go and, like, take out your principles book and read that chapter. Any principle books would do. They talk about, like, long run, short run, demand shift, and this is very principle stuff, right? So you can read any book from, like, there or wherever you can find. Economics books are very standardized, so you can, if you just can just glance through it, that would be good. Okay, and from next week on, hopefully we will have our final class list. Okay, any question?
Ma'am, can we register in this course? We're waiting for long, ma'am. Please give one seat.
Though they see there are 45 people already still here. I don't know what to say to these people, right? So don't worry. Oh, I've told, this is a good news. So what is happening is, because of this high demand, right, and PPE had had, like, designated labor as a required course for them. So there's a lot of demand from PPE also, not only from econ, but also from PPE. So I have decided that I will offer this course again in spring. So if you can't get it now, it's okay. You can take it in spring. Okay.
Ma'am, I have 3 courses and tomorrow is the last date.
It's okay.
Please, ma'am, it's 5 more students.
If you
You
are,
can manage.
no, 5 more, like, it's already 10 more students already, right? So, but don't lose heart. If you have 3 courses, we will make sure that you get, like, there, we just have to redistribute you somehow. So we are looking into, like, areas where we can increase the seat number in courses. Okay, so don't lose heart. We will try to find you courses. May not be your first preference, but as long as you fulfill all the requirements, like, it's okay. Like, life is like that. It's not everything is going to go according to your own plan or your preference, right? As long as we can provide you with the required courses for your major, we are happy. Okay, so that's basically it. So go through it, and then if possible, I'm not asking you, this is not mandatory. If you have time and if you feel like it, go through it. Otherwise, next week I will give you access to everything. Okay.
Professor,